that. Thank you. It's a thrill to be here this morning, especially for the 10th anniversary of NIWeek. And I have to say, given all the energy I've seen in the room and at the parties last night, technology is back, and it's back in a big way. So thank you to all of you who made that possible. The last decade, as you know, were pretty tough on all of us who love technology and love engineering. I'm not sure we thought we'd ever crawl out of that hole, but we did, and we're stronger for it. And companies like NI, I think, have led the way. Where you saw dot-coms emerge in the 90s and, of course, disappear as well, companies just like NI led the way in innovating and creating. And now, as I look out across this room and see the thousands of faces here, you know that the future of the 21st century is in very, very good hands. And so I'm thrilled, absolutely, to be here. And so what I thought I'd do with today's final keynote is to kind of step back and take stock of engineering and engineers and try to leave you with a few things which I hope you can use as you talk to other people about the field and about potential careers. And so when I say kind of big picture, I'm going to start with the big picture. And so as you can see here, one of the important facts I think it's important for us to know that you probably have forgotten already from 7th grade science is that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and billion is 10 to the 9th, so that is an extremely long time that the Earth has been here. And what I think most people don't know, though, is that, you know, we think of engineering as being a particularly modern endeavor. It's really not. We may not be the oldest profession around, but we're pretty close. Engineering's been up and at 'em for 2.5 million years, and it, quite frankly, may have been even longer. I mean, when we think about intelligence, what we really mean is engineering. So when they're studying, you know, when anthropologists and biologists and zoologists are studying animals, and they're saying, oh, how smart is this animal? Most of the tests that we're giving these animals are actually engineering feats. Can they design, create, use tools? And humans have been doing that for 2.5 million years, or at least our predecessors. And so we've had a pretty strong run. But in this 2.5 million years, we still have a problem. People still don't really know what engineering is. We know that things are engineered, but we're not really sure what engineering is. And I see lots of families, lots of kids. They always ask me that same question. It seems like a kind of a silly question. What is engineering? And so there are thousands of definitions. I'm sure you've got your own. But I like to go back to one of the oldest, and I think still one of the truest definitions of engineering. And this was given by Aristotle 2,400 years ago. 2,400 years ago. And I want to spend just a second dealing with this definition because it says a lot about us as a profession. Engineering is the art of directing the great sources of power in nature for the convenience of humankind. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Engineering is the art of directing the great sources of power in nature for the convenience of humankind. And as you look on your slides here, you can see I've highlighted two words: art and convenience. And if you think about it, I mean, Aristotle knew he's a pretty sharp guy at the time that he gave this quote. He could have said engineering is the science of directing, blah, blah, blah. He could have said engineering is the math of directing. He chose art. Why do you think he chose that word art? Doesn't that seem like a surprising word to be using in the context of engineering? Well, Aristotle knew something important. Aristotle knew that engineering is much more about creativity than about explanation. It's much more about inspiration than it is analysis. And so I think when engineering is done right, it really is an art form. And those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know it. When you're in the lab, when you're developing a new technology and you just feel it, you got the mojo going, the sweat's coming down, you're excited. It's not a scientific experience that you're having. It's not a mathematical experience you're having. It's an art form. You're living the art form. And so he was dead on 2,400 years ago. The other word is convenience. That's kind of an odd word to use, isn't it? I mean, engineering is for the convenience of humankind. Why did they choose convenience of all things? You know, we've got convenience stores. Things are convenient to us. What did he mean? Well, actually, I had to go look it up. You know, remember this. He was speaking 2,400 years ago. Words like bling bling didn't exist back then. And so convenience had a different connotation 2,400 years ago than it does today. And what convenience meant in Aristotle's day was meeting a need. Meeting a need. And so for the last 2.5 million years, the last 2.5 thousand years, engineering has been about applying art to meet the needs of humankind. And it's just a simply incredible endeavor that I know all of you are excited about doing every day. Now, let me just ask the question, how have we been doing then? We've been at this thing for 2.5 million years. How well have we been meeting the needs of humankind? And I've just got a couple photos here, and you've seen thousands of examples in your own career and literally hundreds while you're here at NIWeek. I mean, engineering has impacted every single aspect of the human condition, from things which are fairly straightforward like transportation, national security, defense, food, entertainment, sports, medicine. We're everywhere. We're sort of like that fungus that you just can't get rid of. If there's a problem, if there's a need that must be met, there's an engineer lurking in the shadows addressing that problem. And so we have had an incredible run, and I think the future is even stronger because of the tools that we've got available to us now. And so this is a very interesting moment, I think, for us coming into the 21st century, which I think most people will remember as really the era of the engineer. Because as most people know, their prediction, I mean, everything that you see in this room, everything you see outside, when you get in your car, you go home, was created by an engineer or touched by an engineer. Yet predictions show that we will more than double the innovations that you see today over the next 2 decades. That is, twice as many innovations are coming in the next 2 decades as we have today. That's a staggering amount of new product, a staggering amount of new ideas, and we can fully expect that we're going to be seeing societies we know reshaped by engineers. I have to pause a little bit and think back to the early 60s, and I know not everybody was around at that time, but there was a very famous speech given by John F. Kennedy where I'm going to quote this exactly because I want you to listen to exactly what he said. He said that we will place a man on the moon within this decade and bring him home safely. I'm going to say that again. We will place a man on the moon in this decade and bring him home safely. And I think a lot about that statement because I'm wondering, as President of the United States, you stand up, he said we will. He didn't say we want to. He said we will. And then the word that really jumps out at me is this concept of we. Who is the we that John F. Kennedy was talking about? Was it the politicians that were going to put somebody on the moon? Was it the lawyers that was going to put somebody on the moon? Accountants, insurance salesmen, football coaches, nurses? No. He knew it was going to be engineers. Now, how did he know it was actually going to happen? For those of you who studied a little bit, that was a huge gamble for the president to say. You know, today, presidents are a little bit more cautious. When they talk about going to Mars, they use a little more political speak than Kennedy did. He said, we'll do it. And did we do it? Absolutely, we did it. And so he knew, and he had faith that engineers would be able to solve these problems, even though we hadn't the slightest idea of how we were going to pull this thing off. So engineering has had a tremendous run over the last 2,000 years, 2 million years, in fact, actually last 2 years. And so I come back to this quote a lot, and I share this with students. How many of you know who Arthur C. Clarke is? He's had a really remarkable career. He's kind of famous in pop culture for one thing. He was one of the co-designers of the movie, if you call it that, 2001: Space Odyssey. And he made this interesting observation, which I think is true. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I love that concept. Any of you watch these shows on Fox TV where they're kind of peeling back the onion of magic? So they'll show you at the front how you kind of saw a person in half, and we go, wow, how do you do that? And then they bring the camera around the backside, and you see, oh, it's just a trick. That's what this statement is really all about. Take, for example, what I've got up here. Today, if you've got a little USB stick, and I'm sure probably half of you are walking around with one, either attached to your keychain or in your pocket, we're able to put 2/3 of a ton of books inside that little stick, which weighs 1, 2, 3, 4 ounces. That's magic. To the average person, that is just flat out magic. But to the engineer who's actually could walk around behind that and see how that trick is done from behind, we realize it's not magic. That's straightforward stuff. That's what we do. And so it is really remarkable to me that engineers are not only the people that are meeting the needs of society, but we're really the magicians for society. We're the people that the world calls upon to make the impossible happen. You know, this old statement by an engineer when the manager came to him and asked him to do something, and the engineer said, well, the difficult we can do now. The impossible may take a little longer. And I think that's really at the heart of an engineer. We just never give up on problem solving. The reason for our success is pretty simple. We're just never satisfied. Period. We're the biggest critics in the world. And I'll give you an example. Take a simple pocket knife. You know, you start out with a pocket knife, and, you know, what's the objective of a pocket knife? First of all, it's got to fit in your pocket, right? I mean, you wouldn't call it a pocket knife unless they could pull that trick off. And it's supposed to cut something, so it needs a sharp blade on it. And so the engineers, the Swiss Army knife, were able to produce a pocket knife. But we're not satisfied with that. You know, we say, well, okay, does the pocket knife actually open a wine bottle? Well, that wasn't on my requirements list. No problem. Does it actually stitch together leather? Oh, well, that wasn't on my requirements list. No problem. And so you end up with what you got in the middle. And even then, when you think you just can't do any more with a pocket knife, somebody comes and says, I need you to put 2/3 of a ton of books inside that pocket knife. What does the engineer say? No problem. So this is a good time, the 10th anniversary of NIWeek, to step back and benchmark engineering. Which is what we do all the time. I mean, we're one of those great professions that actually does step back, take stock, and say, how are we doing? When you compare us against the very best, how are we doing? And when I ask myself, what's the very best? The very best in terms of innovation, the very best in terms of product creation. It's pretty straightforward. The very best is Mother Nature. No question about it. In the 4.5 billion years that Earth has been around, Mother Nature has been the greatest engineer that this planet has seen, creating ecosystems of such incredible complexity and beauty that it's just mind-boggling to those of us that spend time in the great outdoors. And so I like to just take a second and say, okay, if Mother Nature is the gold standard for innovation, how do engineers stack up against Mother Nature? And so as a simple statistic you may want to carry around with you is the following fact, that what I'll call natural design, some people in biology might call it evolution. Natural design has evolved 1.5 million species of flora and fauna. That's a lot. When you walk around the planet today, over the last 4.5 billion years, we've been able to create 1.5 billion separate species of flora and fauna. So that's my benchmark on how we're doing as an innovator. Now, these animals, this flora and this fauna are incredibly beautiful, complex. Of course, I don't want to pretend to you that engineers have been able to rival some of the things that you're seeing right now. But what I think is kind of interesting is, even if you slice down into the world and say, let me just look at sea life, we see complexity in sea life, I mean, that's just untold. So it doesn't matter how thin you slice this pie, there's complexity. And so that, to me, tells me that you ought to be looking for not only global innovation, but even within a sector, you ought to be seeing innovation. And so that's what I think is kind of an interesting benchmark for us to compare ourselves against. Let me jump forward here real quickly for you. So now we've got our benchmark. Let's see how we're doing. Human as engineers. And you got to go with me on this for a second, because I know that not everybody's going to agree with this analogy, but just for the, it's a keynote. It's not, this is not my Nobel Prize winning address. So give me a little latitude. The U.S. started giving out patents in 1790. And in that time, we've given more than 6 million patents to innovators. And for those of you who've never had a patent, to get a patent, you actually have to come up with a new idea. Or the lawyers have to think you got a new idea. And so I'd say, to me, as an analogy, a patent is in its own way a species in analogy to Mother Nature. And so Mother Nature's got 1.5 million different patents out there. We've got 6 million. What does that mean? That engineers have created a world which is 4x more complex and diverse than Mother Nature. I find that remarkable. And when we think about the natural world as being just unbelievable in terms of its mysteries and complexities, yet the world that we've created as engineers not only meets that standard, but exceeds it. And so that's I think that's something we ought to pat ourselves on the back for. The folks that are here today, I mean, you're adding to this number. This number's going up every day. I'll come back 20 years from now if you guys invite me, and it'll be 4.1 or 4.5. I don't know what it'll be, but it won't be 4.0. And so let's look at some of this diversity, just like we looked at animals. You know, this is an interesting little fact. There are over 30,000 different objects patented for your workspace. Do we really need 30,000 different objects for our workspace? Remember that Swiss Army knife? We started out with something, but we just weren't satisfied with it. And so engineers have been out there trying to out-innovate people on every possible thing you can imagine. If there's a need, if there's a convenience, we're going to meet it. And so these are just some things that I took off of my desk. This is what my desk looks like. I don't know if anybody recognize your own desk. And all of these things have been patented, designed, manufactured, marketed, distributed, bought, brought home, stuck on my desk. It's a remarkable, remarkable feat. And if you slice into this and just look at paper clips. Now here's an interesting fact. God, I know you think, Professor, man, this just couldn't go worse. There are actually books written on the paper clip. There are over 100 patents that exist for the paper clip. What does the paper clip do, by the way? If you read a patent, what the patents say, it is a non-destructive technology that binds paper together. That's what the patent says. Non-destructive technology. What does that mean? You can glue sticks of paper together for your convenience and then undo it. So if you look at paper clips, you know, you recognize the kind of the basic paper clip, but you know, we weren't satisfied. We wanted color. Sure, why not? Okay, we want a little complexity. Now we wanted something lightweight. Now we needed some strength, various different sizes. And then, of course, the marketing people get a hold of this thing, and it turns into a commercial. So even if you just look at something as simple as paper clips, you see that engineers are just not satisfied. What about chairs? You guys didn't expect to see this, did you? I know that. You're not at NIWeek to get a lecture on chairs. You know, we've been sitting for a long time. I don't mean this morning. I just mean in general. And for 99% of the time, we've been sitting on the ground. Only the last 1% of the human existence have we sat in something called a chair. Isn't that amazing? When you thought that we'd have come up with the chairs. We had rocks. We had stumps. We had sand dunes. We didn't have chairs. And so engineers got a hold of this problem. And as you know, there's a tremendous array of chairs for nearly every application under the sun. You know, and here's chairs on the back of a cruise ship. There's a first-class chair out of an airliner. It's a typical office chair. Chairs for the lake. Chairs for the beach. You all know that. That's a dentist chair. Barber chair. Pool chairs. And then we kind of start to get a little crazy. This final chair I want to show you is not a chair at all. What you're looking at is an actual work of art, never sat in, never designed to be sat in. You can find it at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It's an absolute marvel in terms of modern artwork, and it was designed by an engineer. So again, engineers start out trying to address a problem, and eventually it morphs in such a way that the chair, which was supposed to replace the rock, turns out to be a work of art in the end. Just a remarkable story that I think when you look at any technology and you follow its progression, you should expect to see, at the end of the day, something that surprises you. And so, maybe the highest form of innovation in chairs is due to these two young cousins, Edward Naubush and Edwin Shoemaker, who in their early 20s, I think, set the absolute standard, high water mark for chair technology. When they developed arguably the greatest convenience that humankind has ever seen. the lazy boy. And you know what? We weren't satisfied. You know that. So what do we do with the lazy boy? Okay, we made it leather. That wasn't good enough. You get a little stiff sitting in there for 7 hours. So we put vibrators in the back. Well, that wasn't good enough. Now we're in there for 9 hours. You get a little thirsty. So we put a refrigerator in there. You see it there on the side? God help us when there's a bathroom in here. But it's coming. I guarantee you, it is coming. So I guess I'm driving home the point that don't be surprised where technology takes you, because that's what we do. We surprise each other. And so behind all these innovations that I've been talking about, whether it be something as sophisticated as LabVIEW or as mundane as a paperclip, they're people. I mean, these things just don't invent themselves. There's somebody behind here. And so let me ask the following kind of rhetorical question. Who are these people behind the relentless drive? So again, as a professor, I feel obliged. I cannot go give a talk without actually giving a test at the same time. So we're going to go ahead and play a little game here for a second. Who is the engineer? And what I want to do is I'm going to toss up 2 names. One of those 2 is an engineer. Just yell it out who you think the engineer is. Everybody ready for this? It's going to be a series of 5 or 6. If you don't, if you're passive in this deal, I'm going to actually send out a paper version of it, and you'll have to fill it out, and we'll grade it. So yell it out so we can move on. Okay, number 1 up. Here we go. Neil Armstrong or Albert Einstein? Neil Armstrong. You are correct. The first person on the surface of the moon was an engineer. Number 2, Alfred Hitchcock or Spike Lee? That's Hitchcock. Not that, well, surprising that Hitchcock was an engineer. Not bad, though. Dwight Eisenhower or Jimmy Carter? Man, you guys are good. Jimmy Carter. He was actually a nuclear engineer. Tom Landry or Bill Parcells? It is football season in Texas. In fact, it's always football season in Texas. Tom Landry. You don't remember this, but he brought the computer to modern football. Hedy Lamarr or Humphrey Bogart? Hedy Lamarr, right, has the patent on CDMA technology. Not bad. That is true. And of course, Heidi Klum or Cindy Crawford? Cindy Crawford. Okay, I got to confess. This is not technically accurate, but I just really wanted to get Cindy Crawford in this talk, so. She did spend 2 years studying engineering in Northwestern. Looks pretty good. Anybody want me to move on, or can I just sit? Can I just sit here for a second? Okay. Okay. There's still more. You know the Nielsen rating system? We did that. The Olympics? We're there. Rock and roll, man. Who was there in the 80s? Boston. I mean, that's awesome, man, to have one of the people out of Boston be an engineer. From MIT, no less. Not surprising. And, of course, one of the great political figures of the 21st century. So engineers are everywhere. And I think this is an important message that we take forward and that we have to take forward. If you get an engineering degree, that doesn't mean that you're limited in your options. That literally means you're unlimited in your options. You know that in terms of the kinds of technical companies you work at, but you're also unlimited in terms of other kinds of things that you do. And so it is important that when kids go off to college and pursue engineering as a major, they don't think that the only thing they can do is actually go out and design things. They are going to leave the university as the supreme problem solver. Somebody who's got the skills, got the work ethic to go out and meet the needs of society, whether that be in designing a paperclip or whether it means leading a company. And so it's really important that we see examples of engineers doing what you and I would probably call non-traditional activities. Because we do non-traditional activities every day. We just see it so often it seems traditional to us. And so I want to give you another example of this, because this is a real surprising fact. U.S. News and World Report did a survey of Fortune 500 CEOs and found that 17% had a business degree. That probably doesn't shock you. But I think what would surprise most people in this country is that more have an engineering degree. So you're more likely to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company if you're an engineer than if you're an MBA. Does that catch anybody off guard? Does that surprise anybody? The leadership class of this country are engineers. And we need to be proud about that fact. It's really something I think that we should tout more. And I think we should, want to do this more. Everybody in this room should one day want to be a CEO of a company. But there is a dark side to all this, and I hate to do it. This is sort of the second act of the talk, right? This is where somebody gets killed. There is a problem that just flat out won't go away. I mean, we have spent hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars to eradicate this problem. And everything that we've done to address it has, in fact, actually made the problem worse. And I'm going to share this with you. The problem that won't go away is the fact that kids just don't want to study engineering. If you look at the graph on your left, those are the engineering enrollments here in the United States over the last 2 decades. And what I want you to notice is what? It's headed south. Now, what's shocking about this is if you think back about the last 2 decades, the last 2 decades gave rise to some of the most remarkable marvels. I mean, these kids that are in college today have only lived in the last 2 decades for the most part. They've only lived in the era of the cell phone, the internet, DVDs, HD TV, cars with airbags, people in outer space. I mean, these are the great marvels of modern engineering, yet these kids just say, nah, I don't need it. I want to go do something else. And it's absolutely shocking that this is occurring today because it's a uniquely American phenomenon. If I was to show you China or I was to show you India, the graph would be just the opposite. You'd see just skyrocketing numbers in those countries. It is a fundamental American problem that just won't go away. And it's not going to get any better. How many of you remember the SAT or the ACT exam? You probably took one. Well, as part of the ACT exam, they survey kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? And what we've seen over the last 12 years is that there's been a 37% decline in high school kids' interest in pursuing engineering. 37%. I mean, that's a big deal. So the fact that we saw that curve dropping off in terms of engineering enrollments, it's just going to keep going and going and going for the foreseeable future unless we do something about it. I want to give you a couple numbers that I think and I hope will terrify you or concern you. We'd always hope that one day we could create an engineering workforce that looked like us. But as I look out in this room and it's hard to see, I still don't see the diversity that we see when I walk down 6th Street. Well, I don't mean that kind of diversity. When we see walking around Austin, it's just not there. Let me give you a couple numbers here. Just Texas-based, but the rest of the country is the same way. There are 215,000 kids that graduate from high school in the state of Texas. It's a lot. Yet we only graduate 497 Hispanic engineers a year in the state of Texas, starting with an initial pool of 70,000. If you look at the African American community, there are 22,000 African American kids that graduate from high school every year. Yet only 141 graduate with an engineering degree. That's just staggering to me. Absolutely staggering that this is happening today in our society. And the problem with women is even worse. There are 120,000 smart, talented young women that graduate from high school in this country. I mean, in the state of Texas. 120,000. Look at the number that get an engineering degree at the bottom. 633. 120,000 funneled down to 633. That is just a frightening number. And the sad part about it is we're going south on both of those. There are fewer minorities and fewer women pursuing engineering today than there were 10 years ago. And so it is possible we could shrink down to something so astronomically small that we just give up on the problem. That's my concern. I mean, we've got to fight through this and resolve it, not give up on it. Back to women. I mean, women have been great engineers forever, quite frankly. You know this concept, you get sick at home or you hurt yourself at home, you go to Dr. Mom. It's the same thing in engineering. I mean, women have been out there innovating, out-innovating us, men, for a long time. And so if we can get more women coming into the engineering world, we'll have a better world for it. You know, 80% of everything which is purchased by a female. 80%. Now, why is that funny? Now, here's the economic opportunity for you CEOs out there. Only 8% of the things that they buy were designed by women. And when you think about that, as soon as we can equalize those two, we're really going to be off to someplace. And you know, what's interesting, women are pretty good about innovation. You know, it wouldn't surprise you that a woman invented the brassiere. That would make some sense, right? It might shock you, though, to learn that the woman also invented the jockstrap. So there's a lot to be gained by having more women engineers. I guess is my point. I don't know if I made that point all that clearly, but you get the idea. I got more examples, by the way, if you're interested. Now, I got to tell you about the possible solution. It's not all, I mean, okay, so that was the second act. Let's kind of ramp this thing back up again. There is some hope out there. You know, today, if you're a kid in high school, you can go take a class of biology, you can go take a class in chemistry, English, world history, Spanish, French, you name it. You can't take a class in engineering. Isn't that amazing? Remember where we started? The human-made world, that is the world that engineers created, is 4 times as complex as the natural world, but you can't take a class. And so in 1999, a small group of us set out to address this problem and try to ensure that every kid in the United States, and quite frankly in the globe for that matter, has an opportunity to be exposed to engineering and do engineering early in their life, not just so that they become engineers, that's not the end game, but so that they understand this human-created world around us. They understand the design process. They understand how people solve problems, bring conveniences to humankind. And so, thanks actually to a lot of help from Texas Instruments, the Department of Education, National Science Foundation, and now National Instruments, the Affinity Project is off to the races. In the short time it's been around, it's in schools in 22 states across this country today. So as I said, you can't take an engineering course. That's really not true. Today you can. Not uniformly, but it's there and it's happening and it's growing. And really one of our great keys is that it's easy for schools to implement. You know, for those of you who study public education in the United States, you know that we've got a long way to go. We're not anywhere in the top 10 in terms of modern countries. I mean, our kids perform really down at the level of Greece and Spain in terms of math and science, and we haven't been able to solve that problem. But if you let an engineer into the classroom, all of a sudden good things start happening, right? We're problem solvers. We want to get to the solution. We don't care so much about the process. We're about the solution. So when we set out to address this problem of why kids can't take engineering in schools, we said, well, the main reason is it's just not easy for schools to do it. So let's eliminate all those barriers, and that's why we've had such a rapid adoption rate. And one thing I think that you'll be pleased with, and you've seen some demos already here, is that thanks to National Instruments and the team up in Dallas, we've been able to put the very best technology in these kids' hands. And so it's important that if a kid's going to get one bite at the apple, one chance to be exposed to engineering, that they're doing something pretty darn good. And so we're using NI software together with TI's DSP technology that's fully integrated here by the people at NI, and the kids just love it. Let me tell you about what they do in the classroom. This is what happens every day. I mean, these are not the award winners. This is just every day in the class. I mean, these kids are out there designing and building musical instruments. They're creating special effects for movies and TV. They're designing the brains for robot systems. They're encoding secret messages between each other. They're making cell phone calls on a cell phone they built and designed. Today, that's a 15, 16-year-old kid. And I think, again, you know, that's what LabVIEW does for you. It allows you to take somebody with an idea and a little bit of time on their hands, and they could be dangerous. And so these kids today in high school are doing engineering, I would say, rivals anything that you find on a college campus. And it's only going to get better because technology is going to continue to improve. let me just tell you about what its impact is, because everybody wants to know the impact study. So we went out and commissioned an independent study, and all I want you to do is focus on the top one. Kids that actually take this course in high school, that is register for engineering in high school, at least the version that we offer, are 40 times more likely to pursue engineering than their control group. That's not 4% more likely, that's not 40% more likely. You guys know what 40 times means. So those hundreds of kids that we see going into engineering today could be thousands and tens of thousands if this was made available to more students across the country. So there is hope on the horizon, and I think you'll see the trend. I think we will bottom out. The derivative will go to zero, and hopefully the second derivative will be positive. All right, let me just finish up now with a little bit about culture. Engineering has really driven culture. And I just give you an interesting data point while I was preparing. This was something that didn't make it in to this presentation. I deleted it at the last minute, but I loved it so much, I was conflicted about it, so I'm going to reinsert it without the slide. I went back and I looked at the very first patent issued in the 18th century, the very first patent issued in the 19th century, 20th century, and 21st century. And said, what can I learn by looking at those patents? What would those first patents at the dawn of the century tell us about what was to come? So if you look at the 19th century, what was going on in the 19th century? It's like the 1800s, right? It was an agrarian society here in the U.S. Most people were farmers. We made our living and sustenance by kind of raising food, selling it to others. The very first patent of the 18th century was for fertilizer. Amazing. Move ahead 100 years. We're now in the 20th century, which was what? The age of manufacturing, the age of domestication, that is, people are now living in cities. Dad goes off to work, mom stays home. The very first patent was for the washing machine. And now we're at the 21st century. Who knows what that's going to be? But I will tell you what the very first patent was, and you can extrapolate from there. The very first patent was for eye protection for X Games related activity, extreme sports. And so engineering has really been driving culture for centuries here in the U.S., but we don't get credit for it. We still get beat up, right? We're still the dork in the classroom. We're still the person you just don't want to be stuck on an elevator with. Happens to me all the time, by the way. And there's a reason for it. And you can go to the Library of Congress and read all the federal studies. And you can read all the surveys, but it comes down to one thing. One thing. That's our problem. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Do I actually have to spell it out for you? Do I have to tell you what our problem is? Look at that picture. It speaks volumes. That's not the reality. I mean, that's not what I see here. You know that. But remember, the rest of the world isn't at NIWeek. 99.9999% of the world is off doing their own thing, selling insurance, making hamburgers, and this is what they think engineering is all about. And so until we get past this, until we take our proper place in society, as really as the rock stars of the modern world, we're going to suffer. Kids are going to run the other way when they hear the word engineering. People are going to turn their back in the elevator. And so we've got to address this. But I got to tell you, it's not always been this way. You know, if you go back 100 years, 200 years, engineering feats were really rock festivals. I mean, it's an amazing fact. I'll give you a couple of examples here real quickly. You know, when the first cablegram was sent from America to Europe, there were 25,000 people that ran drunk through New York. I mean, over a cablegram, for goodness sakes. And when, you know, the Golden Gate Bridge was completed, 200,000 people celebrated for a week. I mean, that's California, right? Take the art of partying up a notch. And this is one that I think is still remarkable to me. When the Eiffel Tower was created, 32 million people came to see it. That's half of Europe. Half of Europe showed up to see the Eiffel Tower. I mean, that's just absolutely incredible. And so there was a time, I'll give you one last example here. You know, the Crystal Palace in 1851 has been studied because it was really the birth of the age of the machine. 6 million people showed up to see all these little gadgets and gizmos, just like this. Can you imagine if 6 million people came to NIWeek? Be awesome, wouldn't it? Yeah, you couldn't afford giving away the T-shirts. That'd be your problem, right? You could not give away 6 million T-shirts. But it wasn't just it wasn't just the engineering feats, you know. I mean, engineers used to also be rock stars themselves. It's hard to believe this, but, you know, the Wright brothers, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, these people traveled with kings. They hung out with supermodels. That's not the case today. I don't see Bill Gates and Heidi Klum together. Quite frankly, I don't see me and Heidi Klum together. That's probably the real problem. We used to be celebrities. We should be celebrities. In fact, you know, if you were to ask kids, name some engineers, they're more likely or not going to name somebody that's dead than alive. The people that are here in this room that are creating and out-innovating the rest of the world are unknown to popular culture. And that's a real shame. Because we know who modern musicians are. We know who modern sports figures are. We know who modern actors are. But when the history books are written about the world, they're not going to show up. They're going to be in the footnotes. It's going to be the engineer that's going to be in chapter 1 because we're the people that created the world around us. We're the ones that gave the world 4x, 4.1x, 4.5x, 5.0x. So I'm just giving you a couple examples of people that have now been long lost to history. Some of you who are history buffs might remember these folks. This is one of the most amazing stories, Philo T. Farnsworth. I mean, with a name like that, you know that everything was lined up against this kid. He grew up in a farm in Utah. And as a 15-year-old kid, he walked into his chemistry class, sat down with his chemistry teacher, and told that teacher something absolutely amazing. He said, "Teacher, I've just figured out how to build a television." And the teacher looked at him and said, "What's a television?" Before the concept of a TV was even dreamed of, this guy was a 15-year-old kid who had the idea that became the original patent for the TV. And a simple little fact, how many of you have been to Washington, D.C., the national capital? There's statues everywhere in the national capital. A fact you may not know, every state in this union has the honor of putting a full-size statue of their favorite son or daughter in the Capitol. Every state. Who did Utah choose? Philo T. Farnsworth. Isn't that amazing? And yet he's lost to history. What about Chester Carlson? Anybody ever heard of this guy? Completely revolutionized the office as we know it. Here was a guy that grew up so poor that after his mother died, he and his father literally lived in a chicken coop for 2 years. A chicken coop. Anybody ever been in a chicken coop before? It's not where you want to be. You'd rather be on an elevator with an engineer than in a chicken coop, I can assure you of that fact. And yet he had the idea of photocopying. Now, doesn't that seem like a pretty mundane deal? Photocopying? Like, what's the big deal with photocopying? Well, let me put photocopying into context for you. We make a big deal out of Gutenberg. Everybody know what I'm talking about? A big deal out of Gutenberg. What Gutenberg did was important, but what Chester Carlson did was simply revolutionary. Today, there are over 1 trillion photocopies made every year. And wouldn't you want to be Chester Carlson? He actually gets a little money for every single one of those. So when you're in there just seeing paper pop out, just remember it's going into his personal foundation. I'm sorry that he's passed on. And finally, somebody that really, I think, is as much a political figure as he is an engineer, in the sense that without Willis Carrier, there would be no modern Austin, there would be no modern Houston, no modern New Orleans, no modern Atlanta, Orlando, Phoenix. Why? Who'd want to live in Phoenix without air conditioning? Who'd want to live in Houston, New Orleans without air conditioning? And so what you're seeing are the stories of countless engineers that have been out there rewriting the rules on society, and yet somehow they've just drifted off into the past. And so as I look out today, And I see all of you, modern innovators, creators. I don't want that to happen. So this is our opportunity and our moment to celebrate you, the modern rock stars, the engineers who are going to rewrite the rules for the future. So I give to you the people, today's rock stars, the people of National Instruments. Thank you.
You may find yourself living in a shotgun shack. And you may find yourself in another part of the world. And you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. And you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? Letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. Letting the days go by, water flowing underground into the blue again. After the money's gone, once in a lifetime, water flowing underground. Yes, she told me I need girls like you. She also told me stay away, you never know what you'll get. Just the other day I heard a soldier's falling off some Indonesian junk that's going round. Oh, mommy's alright, daddy's alright, they just seem a little weird. Surrender, surrender, but don't give yourself away. Hey, hey. Now you show us everything you got. You keep on dancing and the road gets hot. You drive us wild, we'll drive you crazy. So you just wanna go for a spin. The party's just begun, we'll let you in. You drive us wild, we'll drive you crazy. You keep on shouting, you keep on shouting. I wanna rock and roll all night, party every day. I wanna rock and roll all night, party every day. I wanna rock and roll all night, party every day. I wanna rock and roll all night, party every day. Burn it out. You're truly the rock stars of the 21st century. Help us out on this chorus right now. I wanna rock and roll all night and party every day. I wanna rock and roll all night. Let's hear ya. I wanna rock and roll all night and party every day. I wanna rock and roll all night